Okay. We are live. Okay. So, it's Saturday morning. One sec. One slight adjustment. So, okay, this is going to be... I'm streaming this, but I'm also recording it. This is going to be a very unscripted, rambling thing. But I want to talk about Coheed and Cambria, because they are my favorite band, and they have a new album coming out. And the question on so many people's mind is, and has been for years, I guess, are they still good? Like, have they gotten worse? Are they washed up? And that's a good question. So I don't know, this is going to be really rambly, and if you don't like rambly, well, sorry. Go watch somebody else's stream. Anyway, okay, so I'm going to start focusing. So, Coheed, they got a new album coming out. It is, it's early July right now. They got an album coming out October 4th, I think. And they've released 2 songs from it so far. And the first song, The Dark Sentencer, is in my opinion, among the best things they've ever done. Like, it's great. I need to clear my throat. This is what I get for streaming at fucking 7 a.m. on a Saturday, but anyway. Yeah, The Dark Sentencer is among the best things they've ever recorded, in my opinion. It stands up there with In Keeping Secrets, or, Welcome Home, or Domino. Coheed, of course, being known for their big album openers. And I think one of the biggest problems with, for example, their last album, Color Before the Sun, was it didn't really have a big album opener. And in large part, that's because it was not a traditional Coheed album. It was more just a collection of songs. It was not a concept album. It was not part of the narrative. And it wasn't intended to be. So, a lot of people were disappointed in it, and myself included. It has a couple good songs, but overall I think people kind of thought it was pretty weak. Yeah, it is pretty weak. But, unpowered, okay. Anyhow, Coheed's known for their big album openers, and, usually they're track 2, but sometimes they're track 3, and Color Before the Sun didn't really have one. Island is a decent song, but it's not really, like, a big album opener. But Dark Sentencer, which is the first and second, if you count the prologue as a separate song. Dark Sentencer is the opener for their new album, Unheavenly Creatures, which is volume 1 of what apparently is going to be a 5-part story, a 5-album story. And a little different from previous multi-part stories they've done. For example, Afterman was literally a double album. This is not a double album. It's going to be a series of... Why am I having so much trouble? Is there like a ladder that I'm missing? Vaxis is going to be a series of 5 separate albums. It's not meant to be like a quintuple album or something, but it's a 5-album story. So the first part of this new story comes out October 4th, and we've been treated to the first 2 or 3, depending on how you want to consider it, songs from this album. And so far, I mean, I like what I've heard so far. Dark Sentencer, as I said, is, I believe, up there with the best stuff they've ever done. And I've listened to it probably 100 times already. I really love it. It's big, it's epic, it's progressive, it's a hard rocking album, or hard rocking song. It doesn't have a whole lot of sort of changes throughout the song in the way that something like the Willingwell Suite tended to, but I think it's not meant to. It's supposed to just sort of be a really big, opening banger. And it, in a lot of ways, it reminds me of 2112. So I'm kind of interested to see if, to a certain degree, the album, when it releases, sounds like 2112. I shouldn't say sounds like, but is sort of on a similar scale. So, anyway, so their last album was not well received, and a lot of people, myself included, did not really enjoy them going away from the story and going away from the concept album style. And and again, I think they just wanted to do something a little less serious and a little more, just based on their real lives. And obviously, Claudio wrote these songs in his apartment in New York, and they're very personal, and they're about his family and his son and his wife, and that's great. That's what, he's getting older, and that's what he finds inspiring now, and I understand that, but I don't think it makes for the best Coheed music, right? Because there's a million bands out there who sing songs about love and about family, and that's not what Coheed's about. On a certain level, Coheed is about love and family, but in a sci-fi, on a cosmic sci-fi scale. The story is part of what makes it so fun, and it's it doesn't even really, the narrative doesn't even matter. It's the fact that there is a narrative, I think, drives the music and makes it more epic and more engaging, and Color Before the Sun just sort of lacked that. I think, to a certain degree, there just wasn't much push behind any of those songs. I remember when they released the first single from it, which was "You've Got Spirit, Kid," and I was just like, yeah, okay. I listened to it a couple times, and I'm like, yeah, this is, it's a song. And I was just sort of underwhelmed and disappointed. And on its surface level, I should love that song, because I've always really enjoyed their more pop punk sort of stuff. And it took me a long time to figure out why I don't like "You've Got Spirit, Kid," because it is very much a pop song. But I think the difference between it and something like Three Evils off of In Keeping Secrets is Three Evils is very much a pop punk song. And there's really nothing punk about You've Got Spirit Kid. It's a very just sort of generic radio rock pop song, and it just does nothing for me. And it's got the cringy line, "Nobody gives a fuck who you are." It's like, ugh, this coming from a band who talks about bashing in a young girl's head. It's just like, I don't know, hearing a 40-year-old man say fuck as if it's edgy, just, there's something amiss there, in my opinion. And again, like, this is what he wanted to do. He wanted to take a breather and work on stuff from his life, and come back to the concept later. And yeah, again, on its face, that's fine. But I still just don't feel like they really created a good album, because the music, for me, it's about the music. I like Coheed's concept, but it's always been about the music, and I think whether the concept is front and center or not, it does drive the music. So that's kind of a rambling thing, but my point being, Color Before the Sun came out, and after You've Got Spirit Kid was released, and what a terrible single. Like, they could have picked, they should have gone with, I think Island ended up being the second single, and Island is a much better song. It's not great, but it's a lot better, and should have been the first. But really, I would have made their first single on that be Atlas, because that's possibly the only great song on that album. And I think maybe they didn't use Atlas because Claudio had already released it as just as an acoustic, off the cuff kind of thing. I have to climb here. And I think that might be why, and I think the other reason might be why, because that song's very personal. It's, it's literally about his son, Atlas. So maybe he thought, this isn't, like, the most appropriate single. I don't know. But they chose You Got Spirit Kid, and I hate that song. And I think I've hated it since the moment I first heard it. And, whatever, it is what it is. But then the album came out, and Island is a pretty good song, and Eraser is a really interesting song, in my opinion, because I think Eraser is very much... What am I... Jump up here? What am I doing? Oh, there's like a ladder. Okay. I think Eraser is very much autobiographical, because it's it's basically about a midlife crisis and wanting to go back to the way it was. And I think that was, to a large degree, I think that was just Claudio being honest, like saying, I'm not super satisfied with the direction the music has gone, or that his life has gone. And like, I get it, because I agree to a certain degree. And I don't want to make it sound like I, as a fan, I'm sitting here like hating everything this guy does. No, I still love the band. I still love their live performances. Are still incredible, and even off of their last 4 albums, there's still stuff I like. It's just, I'm probably gonna fail this mission. It's just it's not quite up to the caliber of their earlier work. So, hey, thank you for following. I'm kind of ranting here, so I appreciate the follow on a rambling, ranting stream. But I'm going to keep ranting. Anyway, so yeah, Eraser, I think, is in a large part about sort of his his midlife crisis, and I'll be interested to see from that perspective how their new album sort of turns out, because I think based on what we've heard so far, it sounds sort of like I failed the mission, figured. It sounds sort of like, you know, their older material. And you can never recapture like the same style, you know, like I know this as a musician, not that I'm a published musician or anything like that, but you evolve as you learn, as you grow, and so it, to a certain degree, trying to make the same music over and over again is a betrayal of who you are as a person. I think that's ridiculous. You know, there's bands out there that never change, and they just release the same album over and over again. And you know, there's always going to be a certain set of fans who that's what they want. But then there's people who do want to see some evolution. So I suppose it's, you know, it's ironic that I complain about them changing their sound and doing something different, and then at the same time I'm saying, you know, well, obviously they grow as people. But I guess it's not so much that the sound changed. It's that it's like the inspiration went away. It seems like the spark that made Coheed's first 4 albums so great kind of died somewhere. And it, to a certain degree, for the last 4 albums, it seemed like they've just been sort of going through the motions. And that's really disappointing. Because, you know, I mean, I've got Second Stage Turbine Blade playing right now. There was so much passion. You can look back on it. You know, this album came out 15 years ago. More than 15 years ago. You can look back on it and say, well, you know, it was sort of immature. It was sort of goofy. And yeah, it was, but it had so much passion. You know, these songs, he had been writing them for years and years and years before they actually made this album. They had appeared on the Shibuti EPs, and he was even writing songs that later appeared on In Keeping Secrets at the time. So there was so much passion that had been put into that had been put into those first couple of albums, because, you know, it really was his life's work at that time. And I think to a certain degree, you know, success makes everyone sort of fall back on their laurels, and I think that's sort of what happened to Coheed to a certain degree. And again, I'm not saying that they haven't done anything good. You know, my point is that they actually have. That's sort of what I want to get into talking about, is that they have done a lot of good, made a lot of good music in the last 10 years, but that I still think they could sort of get better. and I'm hoping that the passion with which it seems that Claudio is currently you know, putting his heart and soul into this new 5-part story, I'm hoping that is indicative of really good things to come. So that's kind of the crux of this rambling, long-winded, ridiculous, nobody's even listening, who cares, but I just wanted to talk about it. So, Coheed. I think a lot of people discovered them because of Faber House, which at the time that it came out, the video was getting a lot of play on like MTV, And I vaguely do recall hearing that song at the time. But I didn't become a fan, as so many others didn't, until Welcome Home, which was on Rock Band. And, that's... You talk to Coheed fans. There's some that have been there since the very beginning. There's some that have been there since In Keeping Secrets. But most, I think, got into Coheed around the Rock Band era. And for me, that's totally what it was, because I remember getting Rock Band for Christmas in 2007, and playing through it and getting to that song, and I had just really never heard anything like it. I was just like, what is this? I'd heard their name before, Coheed and Cambria, and like I said, I think I had heard Favorite House before, but I didn't know who that was by. But I had friends at school who I remember, hearing talk about Coheed, and friends who were big fans of theirs. So I connected the name, but I'd never really connected the music. I didn't know, at the time I didn't know what they were. I didn't know. I think I might have thought they were rap or something at first. I don't know where I got that idea, but yeah, I didn't know anything about them. And so I'm playing Rock Band, and I get to that song, and I'm like, what is this? Because I was a huge Rush fan. This was 2007, so I would have been 16. I was a huge Rush fan. I've been a huge Rush fan since I was maybe 12. And I think a lot of people who are my age, who are big classic rock fans, it's because of their parents. But in my case, my parents were not Rush fans. I discovered Rush on my own. And my mom was more into new wave stuff, like The Police or Cars, that kind of stuff. And my dad was more into Dire Straits. So to a certain degree, Rush was the complete antithesis of what my parents listened to. And I remember, getting into Rush around the age of 12 or 13 or something, and my mom was just like, where did you come up with this? Where did you hear Rush? And I don't really remember. I remember hearing Tom Sawyer on an episode of Futurama and being like, oh, that's really cool. I want to know more about that band. And then obviously I'd heard them on the radio. Closer to the Heart plays all the fucking time on the radio. Limelight, Free Will. You hear Rush all the time on the radio, especially in the early 2000s. And I had just been sort of hooked. And I got their... I know that originally I was talking about Coheed, and this kind of seems like a tangent, but it's all really relevant to sort of what I'm getting at here, so we will get back to that. But I just wanted to explain sort of my journey as a fan of progressive rock. And so I got Rush's greatest hits around, I don't know, 2003 or something. And my mom was like, where did you get into Rush? And I was like, I don't know, I just heard it and I like it, and I wanted to know, wanted to sort of get into it. And that was around the time I first heard 2112, and because you hear Rush's radio stuff, like Tom Sawyer, Spirit of Radio, Free Will, Limelight, and those are incredibly great songs that are very different from most sort of classic rock that a 13-year-old kid might be hearing in 2003, but to a certain degree they are more radio friendly. And it was only when I started discovering Rush's catalog that I got into their progressive stuff. As a fucking 12-year-old kid in the early 2000s, I didn't know what progressive rock was. am I even going in the right direction? I had never even heard the term progressive rock, you know, at that time. Like, I was listening to, like, Linkin Park and, like, Three Doors Down and Nickelback. You know, I was really in the post-grunge, new metal sinkhole, you know, and I didn't know what progressive rock was, but I knew that I liked Rush, and as I found out more and more about sort of these longer epic songs, not just from Rush but from other bands, I was like, you know what, this is something I really, really enjoy. And I wanted to hear more stuff like it, you know? And I mean, to a certain degree, there's nothing like Rush, but my progressive rock itch sort of started with them. And so, you know, fast forward, 2007, Rock Band comes out, and I hear Welcome Home. And I'm like, okay, so this is Coheed and Cambria. I didn't know who they were. I'd heard their name, but I'd never put two and two together. I didn't know they were a progressive rock band. I knew that some of my friends listened to them, and I knew that those friends listened to a lot of, like, emo. So I had always assumed, I don't know, at first I had assumed Coheed was a rap group for some stupid reason, but then I learned that they weren't, and I had assumed they were emo, which, I mean, they are, but I didn't know they were prog. I didn't know that there was progressive influences there, and if I had, I probably would have gotten into them sooner, before Rock Band, because I, at that time, was so into prog and wanted to hear, you know, more stuff like Rush, but maybe from a more modern perspective. So it's a shame, really, that I didn't look them up sooner, but, you know, whatever. As with so many other people, Rock Band came along, and I'm hearing Welcome Home, and I'm thinking, okay, this is big, it's, you know, it's hard rocking, it's anthemic, it has a similar scope to something like 2112, or you know, it's hard to compare, like, individual Rush songs to Coheed, because obviously they are very different, but it, you know, clearly this was a band that rocked hard but also had very much a prog sensibility, and I was like, okay, I need to know more about these guys. So this was, like, right around the time that No World had just come out, and I guess I don't need any of these. So this was right around the time No World came out, and I was looking on iTunes at the time. You know, I looked up Welcome Home, and I picked up Good Apollo, and I picked up No World because it had just come out, and I was just floored. You know, it was instant love. I remember listening to Good Apollo, and because obviously I started with Good Apollo because it was the older of the two albums, and because Welcome Home is what I had first heard, and I was so into Welcome Home that I was like, I need to hear the rest of this album, so I listened to that before I listened to No World. But I remember, you know, listening to the orchestral. In fact, I'm gonna switch the music over because I want to listen to it while I talk about it. So, Keeping the Blade. I remember listening to this and just being like, what is, you know, this is prog. This is incredible. There is something here that I've never heard in any other band, aside from maybe Rush. And, you know, obviously, of course, there's a million great progressive rock groups, especially from Rush's era, but I was specifically looking for something new, something for my generation, and this was the first band I think I'd ever really connected with, that was a current band that had the same sort of progressive, melodic, epic feel that I was looking for. And I just fell in love with this album. Just completely fell in love with it. I listened to it, 1,000 times. And you hear Welcome Home, you're like, this is huge. But then 10 Speed comes on, and I'm like, okay, so that, not all of their songs are these big sort of hard rock / maybe metal kind of bangers. Clearly they have a bit of a range to them. And because 10 Speed, I think, is very much one of their more poppy songs. And to this day, 10 Speed is one of my absolute favorite Coheed songs. And it quickly, it eclipsed my love for Welcome Home. But then, Crossing the Frame is also sort of more of a radio-friendly song. And then, Apollo 1 comes on, and it's like, okay, this is very prog. This is I shouldn't say high concept. High concept implies that it's a simple concept. But, this is very rooted in the concept. Because I must have known at this point that there was a story behind it. I just didn't really know much about the story, and I didn't really care. I was just into the music and dissecting the lyrics. And Apollo 1, I think, is such an interesting song because it sort of breaks up the more radio-friendly portion of the album and reminds you that you are listening to something that has more, artsy aspirations. And that was kind of the first song like that, I think, that I'd ever really heard from a modern band. And, Once Upon Your Dead Body is more poppy again. The Suffering. But then the Willingwell Suite comes along. And I was like, okay, this is the band for me. Because, I was a huge Rush fan. I was a huge fan of 2112 and of Hemispheres, Natural Science. I love Rush's longer, more proggy, sort of epic suites. And the Willingwell, I'm like, this is a 4-part song, and each part is just jaw-droppingly awesome. They're so intricately crafted. There's just so much love in put into that album, and it was just unlike anything I had ever heard from a contemporary band at the time. And I'm saying a lot. Should probably not, but but I was hooked. I was into Coheed at this point, and then I listened. I just said it again. And I listened to No World for Tomorrow, and it's just more of the same. I've always preferred Good Apollo. I think Good Apollo is an overall more solid album, but No World for Tomorrow is also an incredible album. And listening to that, you're just like, you can hear how much passion and how much love, not just Claudio, but the whole band put into those albums. Even despite the fact that, during No World's production, they were going through some serious member changes and some serious trials, they still put out some of their absolute best work. And it just blew me away. And I'm like, I need to hear everything this band has ever done. And I go back, I picked up Second Stage and In Keeping Secrets, and I'm listening to them. And at first, I didn't like them as much. It's not like I didn't like them, but I think Good Apollo is, to this day, Good Apollo is my favorite album. Period. Not just of Coheed, but just of any band. And to this day, Good Apollo, I think, is unmatched by Coheed in terms of its scale, but also its variety. There's so much. It's really hard to put into words, but there's just a certain something on this album that they hadn't done before, and they haven't done since. So I think going back and listening to In Keeping Secrets and Second Stage after I had got into them because of Good Apollo, to a certain degree, I won't say I was disappointed, but to a certain degree I was like, okay, well, clearly, album 1 and 2 were great, but clearly album 3 was when they really hit their stride, and I still feel that way. But the more I listened to Second Stage and In Keeping Secrets, the more they just grew on me, and like, I still love No World for Tomorrow, and at the time I think I considered it my second favorite Coheed album, but today I consider it my fourth favorite, because I really do prefer Second Stage and In Keeping Secrets. Like, I would have to say, for me it's Good Apollo, and then either Second Stage or In Keeping Secrets. I have a really hard time deciding which I like better. It doesn't really matter. And then No World. But I think at the time, going back and hearing Second Stage and In Keeping Secrets, I was just like, okay, this is less polished. Obviously, they were more immature when they wrote this, both as people and as musicians. But there's so much raw passion to it. There's something so real about it. And I was just hooked into that too. In Keeping Secrets, the opening notes of that song, the dun 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 dun, it's just, you're immediately like, this is huge. I say huge in spite of its really thin, shitty production, but obviously if you see them live, you'll know how huge it really is. But yeah, it was just huge. It was something so unlike any other band out there at the time. And me, 16-year-old me, being a huge Rush fan, I'm like, this is good shit. This is, they quickly became my favorite band. And that was right around when I was graduating high school, 2009. So 2010, they announced their new album. And I'm a freshman in college. I'm living in the dorms. And I remember they announced their album, and they released The Broken as their first single, and I'm like, this song kicks ass. And I still feel that way. I love that song. That's a great song. It reminded me a lot of, like, No World for Tomorrow. It's sort of a very big, anthemic song. It's a little less, maybe, progressive than No World or Welcome Home, but it's a pretty good song, and I was so psyched for Year of the Black Rainbow. I was like, okay, this is gonna be a great album. And it comes out, and I listened to it, and at first I was like, this is the best album yet. But the more I listened to it, the more I was just like, well, it's good, but it's not their best. And the more I listened to it, I'm like, well, it's okay, but it's not good. And the more I listened to it, I'm like, okay, this album sucks. And it was kind of just a devastating realization that this band that I had been so into for the last, like, 3 years, finally they come out with a new album while I'm a fan, and I don't even really like it. And I was like, oh man, I was so disappointed. And I guess I should explain why I think the album sucks. For what it's worth, I think the first 5 songs on Year of the Black Rainbow are great. I shouldn't say 5, because the first song is an opener, but the first 4 songs on Year of the Black Rainbow are fantastic. They're among Coheed's best. The Broken is a really great song. Guns of Summer, when I first heard that, I was like, this song kicks ass. And I still think it does, but it's let down by its production. And then Juggernaut, of course, is a great song. And then Far. Far is a really good song, too. Even though it's sort of just a generic lovey-dovey ballad, I still think it's a really, really solid song. But, you know, this was, for me, this was around the time that I was starting to you know, I was already a big fan of, like, progressive rock and music for, you know, album-oriented music. But I didn't ever really listen to or pay attention to, like, production, or, you know, the musicality of things. I didn't really pay as much attention to until maybe around then, as I was starting to learn how to play. You know, I started with the drums, and then I started to learn guitar around that time, and I started to pay more attention to, like, things like production, and that was what really struck me about Year of the Black Rainbow, was just how piss poor the production on that album is. And there's a lot of explanations for that. I mean, the first and most obvious is they changed their producer. Well, and they changed the producers multiple times throughout their career, so it's not like this was like a new thing, but their first 3 albums were all recorded at a studio in New York with like 2 of their friends. And I would assume the reason was very much one of cost, because I'm sure they got a screaming deal. And to be fair, it's not like the production on their first 3 albums is all that great. It's actually pretty bad. They're one of the best bands in the world, in my opinion, but they have some of the worst album production on fucking all of their albums, not just Year of the Black Rainbow. But the problems with their first few albums were less glaring. You know, Second Stage is very thin. It's very bedroom quality, but that's part of its charm, I think. You know, these were songs literally written in Claudio's bedroom as a teenager and as a young adult, and the production, the thin sort of shitty production on oh fuck, I'm gonna die. Oh shit. The thin shitty production on Second Stage, I think, is forgivable from that regard. Come on, die. Oh fuck. Anyway, In Keeping Secrets is a bit better, but it is thin. You know, there's not a lot of bass to it. There's not a huge amount of dynamic range. But I didn't care at the time. I was just so absorbed by the music. And later, you know, when Year of the Black Rainbow came out, and I realized I didn't like the production on that album, only then did I really start paying attention to the production values on their first 4 albums, and thinking about what made them good and what made Year of the Black Rainbow bad. So, Good Apollo has pretty good production values, I think. I mean, you know, we're listening to it right now, 10 speed. This is a great song. It's recorded really well. Everything's clear. Everything's balanced well. It doesn't have maybe as much bass or as much punch as it probably should, and I think when you see them live, you kind of realize that. But it's mixed well. It's super listenable. And then for No World is probably their best produced album, because they got Nick Raskulinecz, who is huge. This was Coheed at the height of their career, when they could afford to do this shit. They got Nick Raskulinecz, who is a huge record producer. He's done Nickelback, he's done Metallica, he's done Rush, and that album is just beautifully mixed. It's got so much dynamic range to every single one of those songs on that album. So for Year of the Black Rainbow, they decided to mix it up again, and I don't know why Claudio thought this, considering the songwriting on Year of the Black Rainbow really isn't that different from, you know, No World. But for whatever reason, he decided this is going to be our ambient album. This is going to be our atmospheric album. And so they got Atticus Ross, who is a producer who has worked a lot with Trent Reznor. Of course, anyone who doesn't know who that is, Nine Inch Nails, which of course is a more industrial, ambient, atmospheric sort of sound. And so they record this album with Atticus Ross, and yeah, it's oozing atmosphere, but it's in all the wrong ways. It sounds fuzzy, it sounds cloudy, it sounds unclear, it's sort of buzzing, it's just off-putting, and it really obfuscates what's great about Coheed, which is, of course, the instrumentation and the vocals. It's just a very bleak sounding album, and that extends to the songwriting, of course. But I think a clearer, cleaner production would have made that album a lot better. So I remember listening to it over and over, and at first I loved it, and then the more I listened to it, I'm like, this is not up to the quality of their earlier work. Both because the production was garbage, and because, honestly, the songwriting just wasn't as good. And that's a hard realization for a guy who has just, like, spent the last, 3 years just being like, these are the best fucking musicians alive today. But, it's not like I was suddenly not a fan. I was just disappointed, and I was like, well, I hope their next album is better. And clearly it didn't stop me from being a fan, because 2010, the year the Black Rainbow came out, was the first year I saw them live. They came... I live in Montana, which, we don't get a lot of concerts through Montana, or at least a lot of big bands. And they came and they played Billings, which is our biggest city, which is about a 4-hour drive from where I live. So for my birthday, me and two of my best friends went down to Billings. We rented a hotel room, and we saw Coheed. And it wasn't a great show, to be super honest. It didn't seem like they really wanted to be there. Like, I've seen Coheed 3 times since, and they've all been better shows. So to a certain degree, it really seemed like they didn't want to be there. And they just kind of phoned it in. But, I was still like, this was great. And, they played a pretty good set list. They played 5 songs off of Black Rainbow, but they played a lot of their older stuff. Of course, they played, No World and Welcome Home. And it was like a religious experience. So I was like, this is great. And I picked up... even though I think at that point I was already realizing the faults of Year of the Black Rainbow, but I still, I was so psyched to see them and everything, and I picked up a signed vinyl of Year of the Black Rainbow, which I still have, and that's one of my prized possessions of theirs for sure, because it's actually pretty rare. I've seen that thing go for, $300, $400, but that's neither here nor there. I mentioned that only because even though I didn't really like that album, I was still a huge enough fan that I was like, I need to have a signed copy of this. So, so Year of the Black Rainbow, I'm like, okay, this kind of sucks, but let's see what they do next. Let's see what their next album is like. And so in 2012, Afterman was announced, and their first single was Domino the Destitute. And oh my god, that song, I can't even remember how many times I listened to that song when it came out, because I was just like, this is among the best stuff Coheed has ever done. And oh man, I still think that Domino is just an incredible song. It is so well written, it is so epic, it is so huge, it's so well produced, and of course, this was around the time too that Josh, their drummer, came back, and that was a big deal to me, because I really learned, I'm a drummer, I really learned to play the drums by listening to Coheed's first 3 albums. And I was a huge fan of his. And that was one of the biggest disappointments for me when I had seen them live in 2010, was that Josh was not their drummer anymore. And I was so disappointed, even though Chris Penny is, let's be honest, Chris Penny is a much better drummer than Josh, but he wasn't the right fit for Coheed, and he wasn't, my hero, so seeing them live with Chris is like, yeah, it was great, but I really, really had wanted to see them in their glory days, so to speak. And I had like concert DVDs, of course, but then they announced Josh's return to the band, and of course they did it in such perfect Coheed cryptic ways, where they did these little teaser videos and people were speculating. And I remember when the video came out where they had this cloaked figure playing the time refrain, and I was like, that's Josh. And I knew it was Josh because of his hands. He has very distinct hands, and he has a very distinct style of playing the keyboard. He does this pinky out thing. And I was like, that's Josh. He's back in the band. And sure enough, like 2 days later, they announced he was back in the band. And I was like, okay, their next album's going to kick ass. And it did. Yeah, Afterman is good. It's real solid. Domino came out, and I was like, this is good shit, dude. But then, like, their next single on that came out, which was Afterman. And that song's kind of shitty. And I was like, oh, great, this is going to be another Year of the Black Rainbow. But when Afterman Ascension did come out, I guess I liked it. I don't know. I can't really remember my exact gut reaction, but it was definitely a step up compared to Year of the Black Rainbow, and the production was so much better because they had gone back to their earlier producers, and it did sound a lot more like Good Apollo from that standpoint. And the songwriting, I think, was more like Good Apollo. So I remember, listening to Afterman and being like, okay, this is definitely a step up. This is a step in the right direction. And there's some great songs on Ascension. Domino is a great, great song. Mothers of Men's pretty good. Vic the Butcher is awesome, especially live. If you haven't had the pleasure of seeing them live playing Vic the Butcher, man, I will tell you what, that is an awesome song to be in the crowd for. But there's some songs on Ascension that I absolutely despise. I think Afterman itself is pretty weak. And I think Good Night Fair Lady is among the worst things they've ever written. Right up there with, like, I can't even think of the name of the song off of Year of the Black Rainbow. Made Out of Nothing. I hate that song so goddamn much. And it's just got such a shit, just radio chorus. It's just crap. And in Good Night Fair Lady is a really bad song too, in my opinion. It sounds almost like a generic version of The Suffering. Like if you couldn't get the rights to The Suffering, so you had to like hire like a fucking cover band to like write like a generic knockoff version of The Suffering. That's what it sounds like to me. It's just so bad. So I hate that song. And then Hollywood. I don't know why I'm going through this like song by song as if anyone wants to listen to what I think about each individual song, but I am, so whatever. Hollywood has a great chorus, among the best that Claudio's ever done, in my opinion. But the verses on that song are just cheesy garbage. So, Year of the Black Rainbow came out, or Afterman came out, and I'm like, okay, this is better than Year of the Black Rainbow. But it's still not great. It's not what I want. It's not another Good Apollo. It's not another No World. It's not another In Keeping Secrets. It's not another Second Stage. I mean, to be fair, I don't think there'll ever be another Second Stage, because those songs were written at a time that is just completely gone. You know, those songs were written when Claudio was a kid, and there will never be another second stage. But I don't think there's any reason there couldn't be another Good Apollo. This is a very mature album. So that's what I wanted. I wanted another Good Apollo. And Ascension just wasn't it. And then Descension came out in, February of the next year. And I like Descension a lot more. Descension, I think, is really fucking solid. You know, Century the Defiant is an incredible song. The Hard Sell is really, really good. Number City is one of my absolute favorite Coheed songs. You know, and that's one of their poppier songs too. That stands up there with like Three Evils or 10 Speed, or like, I love Number City. It is so good, and I guess they're playing it live this year, and I'm really excited to see that because I've never seen that song live. But yeah, my point being, so the other songs from that album, from Descension, Gravity's Union. That's one of the best like prog songs they've ever written. Gravity's Union, in a lot of ways, it's like The Crowing. And Claudio himself even mentioned that. I remember in an interview he said, I've got a song on here that's a lot like The Crowing. And when it came out, you're like, okay, that's the song that's a lot like The Crowing. Gravity's Union is so well written and tells the story so perfectly. Like, you know, even without having read the book, which, like, I have read the book, I own the book, but you don't have to read the book. You can just listen to Gravity's Union, and it describes what's going on so perfectly. That's an incredible song. And Iron Fist, I love. Away We Go is pretty good. Dark Side of Me is really good. What's left? Two's my favorite one. That song's But yeah, no, Descension is just a really, really solid album. And it really did sort of make up, to me, it made up for how Year of the Black Rainbow and how Ascension was. And I was like, okay, they're back, you know. And right around Descension coming out was the second time I got to see them live. Me and three friends, we took a road trip down to Salt Lake, which I fondly look back on as one of the best trips I've ever taken with my friends, and we just had a wonderful time, and we saw them out of the Salt Air, which if you've never been to Salt Lake, the Salt Air is this concert venue that is on the shores of Salt Lake. And it's like a converted aircraft hangar or something. And we went there in February, so there was like 3 feet of snow on the ground. It was like the highs in the daytime were like 28, and the show, of course, was at 7:30 or something. So we're standing out on the shores of Salt Lake in it was like 13 degrees. It was miserable. And none of us were, we're from Montana. It gets cold as shit here. But none of us were smart enough to bring winter wear. We were wearing I wear shorts all the time. I was wearing shorts and a fucking hoodie. And we're just standing there. It's pitch black out because, it's the middle of winter. So it gets dark at 5 p.m. And it's pitch black. It's 13 degrees, and we're standing in line outside of this place in 3 feet of snow. What are we doing? But that was such a great concert. It really made up, to me, it really made up for the first time I'd seen them and been a little disappointed. They were so, it just seemed like they were so happy to be doing what they were doing and having Josh back as the drummer, and it was a real good time to be a Coheed fan, I think. Even though I think I had my problems with Afterman, I was still pretty satisfied at that time. I was like, you know what? They still got it. And seeing them live, it was just like, okay, you know, they really do still have it. This is great. This is a good time to be a Coheed fan. So then Color Before the Sun. Man, oh man. You know, I was like... So if you don't know anything about Coheed's concept, basically their first 4 albums, well, their first 5 albums, tell the story of what's called the Amory Wars. And the first 4 albums are parts 2 through 4 of the story, and then the 5th album is a prequel. It goes back and it's part 1. But what they did with Afterman was it's set in the same universe, you know, quote unquote, but it's a way more of a prequel. It's way further back, and it's more of a personal story. It's not on the same like grand cosmic scale. I think it's very much a personal story for Claudio, reflected in the music and in the art. And I was like, okay, you know, Afterman was good, but I really want to see them get back to like a huge concept. So what do? They release The Color Before the Sun, which is their first completely non-concept album. And I was like, alright, fine. It could still be a good album, right? As long as the songwriting's on point. But, like, the songwriting wasn't really on point. You know, because You've Got Spirit Kid comes out as the first single, and I'm like, this sucks. This is just shit. And it had this real cringy video where they were like in high school. Ugh, like there's nothing more awkward than seeing like a bunch of guys pushing 40. You know, I mean, I guess that was the point, right? Like wink, wink. But like, I don't know. It was bad. Color Before the Sun. You know, I remember it came out, and I was listening through it. I was like, well, there's finally a worse album than Year of the Black Rainbow. You know, it's got... I mean, I guess I should talk about what's good about it. It's got better production than Year of the Black Rainbow. No question about that. It's not... Oh, where am I even going? No, okay. It's not like good Apollo levels of good production or No World levels, or even Afterman levels, but it does have good production. And part of the reason it sounds, even, you know, I say good production, but it does sound a little more raw. And part of the reason it sounds a little more raw is because it's very much sort of like a live album. They basically just sort of went into the studio and just busted out these songs in like 2 weeks, and basically just played them live and recorded that. And I think, you know, yeah, cool, okay, that's fine. If the songwriting's on point, then that can be forgiven. But the songwriting, it's not really all that on point. You know, You Got Spirit Kid fucking sucks, and I'm about to die. Oh, wow. Okay, never mind. You Got Spirit Kid sucks, and, like, okay, so Island is a pretty good song, I guess. Eraser is alright. Colors is okay. Here to Mars is pretty good. But it all just kind of goes downhill from there. Like, Ghost is pretty... Well, okay, Atlas is great too, but... I guess I don't hate it as much as I say I do. But there's some really bad songs on that too, though. Like, Young Love is probably the worst song they've ever written. Like, it's embarrassingly bad. It's about his fucking house. And it's written with this just droning garbage riff. I hate that song. Oh my god. If I never hear that song again, as long as I live, I will be perfectly happy. And it's funny because there's a song in there called The Audience where, I mean, he basically just, like, gives a middle finger to his fans and says, like, you know, I'm doing me, fuck you. And I respect that, like, I really do. Like, and I would never want Claudio to, like, sell out. But it's like, you know, he's aware that, like, people don't really like their newer stuff as much as their old stuff, and yet he's still just like, I don't know. Maybe I'm reading too much into it. I don't even really know what I want from them, you know? Like I said, I don't want them to sell out. I don't want them to make the same shit over and over again. But, you know, it's my favorite band. I can't help but feel the way I feel about certain things. So it's like, Color Before the Sun, to me, it was almost just sort of a middle finger. And I get that, you know, these were the songs he wanted to write from a personal perspective, and that it's not meant to be seen sort of as a main album or anything like that. And also that, of course, they don't owe us anything, you know. They don't owe us anything. They can make what they want to make. I get that. But that doesn't mean I have to like it, you know. So, whatever. It came out, and I don't really listen to it very much, and I probably never will. But at least it proved to me that they can, in fact, make a worse album than the Year of the Black Rainbow. So, I mean, if anything, the problems I have with Afterman seem so fucking petty now by comparison, because Color Before the Sun came out, and now I'm like, wow, Afterman is fucking perfect by comparison. So there's that, at least. But all of that to say, here it is. It's 2018, and we are getting a new album. It is called Vaxus, Volume 1, The Unheavenly Creatures. And Claudio has said that this is going to be the first in a 5-album story. It's a completely new story. It's set in the same universe, much like Afterman was, but it is very much a continuation of the Amory Wars, the first 5 albums. It's very much a continuation of that, and it is on the same sort of epic scale. And it's, I'm optimistic. I'll tell you that. Dark Sentencer, the first song, is so good. It really reminds me of how hyped I got in 2012 when Domino dropped. Because I feel the same way. It's just like, it's so good, it's so epic, it's huge. You know, it's just huge. So I'm so excited. And then they've released the second single for it as well, which is called The Unheavenly Creatures. It's okay. It's not it's not the best, but it's far from the worst thing I've ever done. I do find myself humming it or whistling it or just getting it stuck in my head, even though I've listened to it a lot less than Dark Sentencer. So clearly I must like it on some level, because it does get stuck in my head a lot. It's more poppy, which, you know, usually I like. But it's another weird case, because I think it kind of has shitty production, and which is weird because Dark Sentencer has really good production. It's real clear. It's well mixed. But Unheavenly Creatures is sort of poorly mixed in that Claudio's vocals sound really like fuzzy to me. And I'm not really sure why that is, because you would think that the whole album was produced, you know, by the same people. but maybe it wasn't. I don't know. They've re-signed to Roadrunner, so you'd think they had like a large production budget. I don't know, but I'm optimistic. The album is supposed to be 78 minutes long, which is longer than even Good Apollo, and it's 15 tracks. I have a feeling that this is going to be the Coheed that we all know and love. A big, progressive, but still fun, you know? That's what I want. Because in a lot of ways, like, okay, You're the Black Rainbow. In a lot of ways, that's a progressive album, but it's not fun. Afterman, I think, to a certain degree, feels the same way. There is a lot of prog on Afterman, but it's not all that fun. I feel like Unheavenly Creatures is going to be a lot of fun. And if it can... You know, I don't expect them to make another Good Apollo. I just want them to, if not outdo it, at least match it in terms of good. You know, you never want a band to not outdo themselves, right? Like, why would you be a fan if you didn't want them to keep doing better, you know? So I really hope it's a solid album, and I think it will be. I've got a good feeling about this. And I'll be real interested to see what the rest of it sounds like. I like what they've done so far in that the first 2 singles they've released are the first 2 songs on the record. I think that's a great way to do it with Coheed, because I think, like with Afterman, when they sort of release these singles sort of piecemeal from all over the album, and it sort of cheapens the album when you finally listen to it, because Coheed is so album-centric, you know? So it's better to have these songs release in order from the album, because that way you're not sort of getting spoiled, if that makes any sense. Anyway, I'm rambling there a little bit, but yeah, I'm looking forward to it. All this to say, you know, there's some people out there who say, oh, well, they're not what they used to be. No, I suppose they're not. But, you know, how could they be? How could they be what they used to be? People change, people grow, and as long as they can grow as musicians and keep, you know, stay passionate, then I think that's fine. And I think that's, to a large degree, what was so disappointing about Color Before the Sun, is I just don't think there really was much passion there. It almost sounds like Atlas is a great song, and I think there was a lot of passion behind that song, because it's written about his son, and it's a big, epic sounding song. I think there was a lot of passion there, but I think I almost feel like Claudio wrote that song and then was like, shit, I guess I have to write an album now, you know, to like put around it, because everything else on that, oh my god, I love this part, by the way. Little maggot to the line, oh, what you did. Yeah, I don't know, I feel like it was like, shit, I gotta write an album to put around this song now. So that's kind of what ended up happening, and there's just not much passion to it seems like. But, you know, this seems like there's a lot of passion. It's good to see Claudio coming up with a new concept that he thinks he's going to be able to get 5 albums worth of material out of. That's the kind of passion that I think he had when he was writing his first few albums, and I'm really interested to see how that turns out. I think it's a good time to be a Coheed fan again. I think he's only going to keep, you know, putting out more and more great material. So, fingers crossed. For what it's worth, like I said earlier, that the first time I saw them live was pretty disappointing, and then the second time I saw them live sort of made up for it, because it was just one of the best shows I've ever seen. And I've seen them 2 more times since then, and each show I've been to has been consistently great. So they still do obviously have so much passion and love for what they do, at least from a performance perspective. So I'm seeing Coheed 2 more times this summer. We're going down to see them in August in Salt Lake, and I'm really looking forward to that. And then we're going up to Calgary in Alberta to go see them in September. So a lot of Coheed on the horizon for me, and then their album comes out in October. And we'll see, we'll see what happens. I think things are looking up. I think this is a good time to be a fan, and I'm just excited to see where it goes. So yeah, so that's my long rambling rant. Thanks for watching and listening, and yeah. See ya.